And we're live. Hello, everyone. This is Colin once again, and I am beginning this broadcast. This is the Dreaming in Symbols podcast, episode number 7. I am waiting for my special guest to enter the chat. I was having some technical difficulties earlier, and so that's why I'm late in starting the show. But this is the Dreaming in Symbols podcast, coming to you live, 4:30 Pacific Standard Time. Dreaming in Symbols is a podcast dedicated to the discussion of religion, politics, mythology, and spirituality uh, from a unique perspective. While most discourses are characterized by a reductionist perspective, materialistic perspective on one hand, but on the other hand, typically a literalistic, dogmatic, ideological perspective on the other. Dreaming in Symbols offers a third path, one that is focused on the psychology of religion and spirituality, as well as non-dogmatic literalism. So just wanted to begin the broadcast today. The topic will be on Sufism and also the Jewish influence of Islam when my guest arrives, Gibran Malik. Um, so I've been waiting for him in due time. Once he enters the chat, we will I'll introduce him. I'm just waiting for him to enter. Uh, so I don't know how many of you have seen the new book by Michael Muhammad Knight, Why I'm a Salafi. I just picked up a copy myself, and looking forward to reading it in due course. Might be blogging about it, might be doing a video on the subject, but it looks very fascinating. I'm almost done with chapter 1 as of yesterday, and it's a very good read. So I would recommend that for anyone who's interested. I had to make sure that there wasn't going to be any outside noise affecting the broadcast. So if you have any questions for myself or my guest when he arrives, please feel free to leave a comment. If you'd like to call in, please let me know, and I will give you the link to the broadcast and have you come into the show to ask questions of either myself or my guest. So, Michael Muhammad Knight's new book, like I said, it's very good. It takes place right after his last book, Tripping with the Law, which was his book about drug use. He went and experienced taking ayahuasca, which was a very powerful. It's a very powerful hallucinogenic, and he wrote his last book on the subject. This book literally takes place where that book ended. Okay, so I think my guest has arrived. If this is him, Mr. Malik, if that's you. Go ahead and just let me know when you're if you're all set, and then I'll introduce you. Well, I'll introduce my guest, and when he's ready, he'll let me know. Um, okay, so he's setting up his microphone right now, and so I will introduce him and then reintroduce the topic as well. So let me see here. So Gibran Malik he is involved in the study of the Abrahamic tradition in history, and founder of the movement called the Common Accord, which the goal is bringing together a fuller understanding of the great faiths. And so I am very pleased to have him on the show with me today. This is actually the first time that he and I have actually had a conversation verbally. We've talked online, but and we have a mutual friend, and this friend of ours recommended Mr. Malik for the podcast. So to reintroduce the topic is that we're going to discuss a little bit of Sufism, but more importantly, also what, if any, if there is a Jewish influence on Islam, or has Judaism had any influence on the religion of Islam? So those will be the topics that we will begin with, and we certainly don't have to stick to those topics. Again, if anyone is interested in asking a question, go ahead and leave a comment, and we will look at your question, and if we have time, we'll certainly answer it. If you wish to call in and ask us a question verbally, then you just send me a message either on the Aussie CDA Facebook, message me on Twitter, somehow if you're able to get a hold of me, and then we'll give you the link and you can enter the show. So yeah, that's the outline for the show today. So Mr. Malik, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, now we got something going on. Hold on.
Excellent.
Is it coming in clear? Are the levels low? Or?
I can hear you fine.
Okay, sounds good.
Excellent. Well, thank you again for taking the time to be on the show. So like I just introduced you in the topic. So I'm not sure exactly where you'd like to begin. I know our mutual friend said that you're pretty knowledgeable when it comes to the topic of if there's any influence that Judaism has had on Islam. So I don't know if you'd like to start with that, but I'd like to turn it over to you.
Well, it's really important to note that when you say Jewish influence on Islam, to define what that means, because if an older tradition that a later tradition already accepts as valid, it's hard to. I don't like to word it as influence Islam, because it gives a connotation of like I've seen people online who say that Islam is like plagiarism, and then I say, well, what's the definition of plagiarism? Plagiarism means taking something from someone and not giving the credit, whereas Islam affirms everything that's in the Torah and the Tanakh and the books of the prophets. It affirms 100% what it is, where it came from, who it was entrusted to, when it comes to the scripture, even down to the land, everything. So it's kind of an affirmation of the reality of the Jewish tradition, what the Jewish tradition is based off of, because the Jewish tradition itself is something that developed. Part of it is from the original, from Mount Sinai, from when the Ten Commandments and the Torah was given, and part of it also, they have holidays and things that grew over time based on different events like Hanukkah and Purim and other things like that are also part of the Jewish tradition, that developed historically with the people of Israel. So Islam has a different historical experience, and it draws on a different historical base, but the same root. So, for instance, like with an Islamic tradition like Hajj, right? Hajj really doesn't have a Jewish influence per se, but it has an Abrahamic influence. So the concept of going around the temple 7 times, that's something that's Abrahamic. It's both shared by Jews and Muslims, and it goes far back. That concept of going around 7 times. Um, so those things are from, they predate the Torah. And going back to Abraham, of course, who is the father of Isaac and Ishmael, and Isaac was the father of Jacob. Jacob was the father of 12 sons, one of them being Judah, Yehuda, which whom the tribe of Judah, the word Jew comes from. So it's kind of complex. When people say the Jewish influence on Islam, it's like, yes, but also, let's not get the idea too twisted. It's influenced, but it's not foreign. So it's not like someone who had no identity whatsoever. They had an identity, but you can say that they've accepted certain ideas that are shared, shared findings, I could say.
Okay, so essentially, what you're saying is that there are similarities because they come from a common root, but the accusation that is perhaps presented by some polemicists that the Prophet Muhammad or the early Muslims essentially stole or plagiarized
Yeah.
Jewish concepts, you would say that's an incorrect statement.
Yeah, that's totally incorrect. For instance, like the Sabbath. Nowhere in the Quran does it say that the Muslims have to keep the Sabbath in the same exact way that the children of Israel are bound to keep the Sabbath. They're bound to keep the Sabbath for many reasons. One of which is they're being freed from the bondage in Egypt. That's a historical experience that is unique to the Israelites. So as Muslims, it affirms the Sabbath and recognizes its importance, and even speaks about the 6 day creation period, and it even calls Saturday in Arabic is al-Sabt. It's the Sabbath. So there's no disagreement on it. It's just that we don't have to observe it in the same way that the children of Israel have to do. So it's recognizing it, it's venerating it, but we're not obligated to follow it in the same exact way as the children of Israel, because they're under a different obligation. So that's one example of what I mean by saying that it's not coming to take Jewish traditions and say, well, we're taking it and we're usurping it, and then it's all about us now. What the fact of what happened after the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him's passing, and his companions and his family, afterwards, a certain narrative started to become more prominent, which was more of this one world or one view theology, or replacement theology, I should say. But it's not a Quranic perspective. I mean, this has only been found recently based on the fact that now that information is readily available, people can investigate and study the history and look at all the different opinions. You're going to start to see that a lot of Muslims are going to start to see, you're going to start to see a lot of Muslims changing their views that have been held for a long, long time, based on the fact of, just having new things presented to them that were not necessarily new, but just not present. It was just never shown to them. It was just never explained completely.
Can you go into more detail about what you mean by the last statement that you made regarding like the row with the information age, and we have access to so much, we have so much knowledge that is sort of being hurled at us like never before. Could you explain a little in more detail what you mean by perhaps Muslims in the 21st century might change their views, or integrate this information? Can you go into more detail about that?
Okay. Yes. To give an example, everything that you're seeing about what's going on with finding out where Christmas came from, not Christmas itself, but the date of December 25th, the Roman influence, the Greek influence on Christianity that kind of developed the doctrine, which was later understood to be, which became Christianity. And the ideas now people are finding out, well, even in recent times, not even just now, but maybe in the past 15, 20 years, slowly and slowly people find out, well, wait, Jesus was a Jew. A lot of people don't even know that, and now people are coming to know that. Now most people know, like, wait a minute, Jesus was Jewish. Wait a minute, he kept the law. Wait a minute, the disciples didn't really teach, exactly what came to be as Christianity. Wait a minute, we're finding Roman and Greek influences that came later. Wait a minute. And now these things were accepted for many, many, many years, but you come to find out that what Jesus's idea of his message is not exactly what the church accepted it to be. And it's a really hard thing to swallow that pill, to say, well, what I was following was not 100% accurate. What my parents were following is not 100% accurate. What my grandparents who have passed away and their grandparents and their parents and their parents, it wasn't 100% accurate. Did they die, believing the wrong, all these questions? Did they die believing the wrong thing? What's going to happen to them? These things are scary. So it's very hard for people to come to grips with the fact that maybe things get embellished naturally over time because of people and politics and things of that nature. So it's tough. And with Christianity, this whole thing is happening where people are, you have this whole movement about the name movement. Now they know the name of the Tetragrammaton, or they're trying to know it and they're trying to pronounce it, and they're fighting over how to pronounce it. And that, and you have Messianic Judaism, which is a Christian approach, which is very, very grassroots in the idea that it's very Jewish, that they keep the law or they keep parts of the law, and they're saying that we're Jews that follow Jesus. So now you have this transitional period we're in. Now with Christians, we're seeing it. With Muslims, we're not seeing it as much, but it's happening very, very slowly, and it's quietly happening because in the Islamic community, there's a lot of strict control over what should be understood and what should be said, and how the communities react to someone who comes with a new idea. It's a lot more strict in the Islamic community than the Christian community.
I certainly have had interactions with the Jews for Jesus or the Messianic movement. They're usually, I see them passing out pamphlets
Mm-hmm.
on my campus, university campus. Very interesting group of people.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm wondering. So you say that there are some things that are quietly or slowly happening in the Islamic community, and yet you do have this sort of this strict sort of kind of keeping guard of changes that could occur. But I'm wondering, can you tell me a little bit more about some maybe one example, if you'd like, of something you see as being kind of like a quiet, sort of subtle thing that's happening in the Islamic community right now that might be considered a change or an embellishment or something like that?
Well, because of all the stuff that's come to light with the hadith, I'm not, the hadith, the oral traditions of Islam, the hadith, for the listeners that don't necessarily know, the hadith literally means a saying. Now, the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, were collected officially around 200 to 250 years after his passing. The official collection. They were collecting it before, but there was no strict investigative approach into the authenticity of these sayings. And around 200 years after his passing, they started to a few individuals started to collect these sayings and started to do a vigorous investigation into what the authenticity was for each saying. So for instance, you'll see a narration, it'll say, just for the sake of making it easier to understand, I heard from this person who heard from this person who heard from this person that heard the prophet say boom, 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 right? So what they did was they tried to investigate the individual they were getting it from, the person standing in society, whether or not they were known to be a liar, whether or not they were known to be honest. But that didn't also, that didn't secure the person that they heard it from, and then they heard it from. So they tried their best, and they also looked at multiple narrations, like if like 4 or 5 people have a chain of transmission that goes back to hearing a similar statement, then they would say this is a more authoritative saying of the prophet because multiple people heard it. So you'll have hadith that have 3 or 4 different chains. You'll have hadith that have like 40 chains. You'll have hadith that have one chain. For instance, the one about him marrying his one of his wives at 9 years old, that only has one chain of transmission. The one about you will on the day of before the day of judgment, you will have a battle with the Jewish people, and they will be hiding behind a stone. It's a really disgustingly sounding hadith, if in my opinion. I don't feel like he said that, and it's only heard by one person. So in these cases, Muslims look at this and they look at the Quran and they see a huge difference in the tone, in just the whole language of the Quran and the hadith. And they know that something's not right. Because if the Prophet, peace be upon him, brought the Quran and narrated that to the people, and that was the main corpus of information, the holy book that It's not changed because it's in rhyme format and thousands of people memorized it and saw it, heard it. And there's a big difference between that and how the hadith sound. Something is wrong, and it's not a coincidence that the hadith were collected officially 200 years after his passing. So slowly and slowly, you'll start to see you'll see Muslims. Some of them deny the hadith outright. I don't agree with that. Um, they call them the Quran only Muslims, and then some of them are vehemently protective of all the hadith and say, you shouldn't do that. And me, I take a middle course. I say that hadith are important. It's a valuable source of information, but it needs to be reinvestigated, and the books need to be opened up because certain things that are going around, especially in third world Muslim countries, those like really fanatical hadith take hold, and you hear that more than you'll ever hear the Quran. They'll recite the Quran, but they don't teach it the way it's supposed to be taught. They'll teach the hadith that suits their agenda a lot more often than the Quran.
Well, I thank you for going into detail about that. I've had a non-Muslim guest on the show a couple of times discussing the authenticity of the hadith. The YouTube user Klingshore, and certainly I recently myself read two books by the Muslim American scholar Jonathan A.C. Brown. One of his books, Misquoting Muhammad, and the other one, his introduction to the hadiths. And it certainly seems to me that has been for a long time a rich tradition of nuance regarding how the early Muslims, all the way up to the modern era, have understood the hadiths, have classified them, have vigorously researched them to determine whether they're authentic or whether you could use them for law or for just for promoting virtue and uprightness. And so, I'm wondering, with what you've said, do you think that, in your experience thus far, would you say that your typical Muslim, for an example, may not know about this rich history of nuance and differences of opinion regarding the hadiths?
Certainly, certainly. There's a lot of Muslims that, for instance, like with dogs, there's four schools of thought that were established somewhere around the same time as the hadith were established. And these four scholars, they were students of each other, and they learned from each other, and they learned under the same teachers, and they belonged to the same school, but they didn't agree. But these four Islamic scholars ended up being the ones that laid down the jurisprudence of Islam, the way it's followed today by the majority of Muslims, the Sunni Muslims. The four scholars are Hanafi, Shafi, Hanbali, and Maliki. Now, a lot of Muslims living in the South Asian subcontinent, they follow a school of thought where dogs are completely, like, not only not allowed, but they're dirty animals. The view is just completely negative for dogs. And they come to find out that the Maliki school of thought, which is more popular in North Africa, says dogs are okay. Yeah, they're not supposed to be where you pray at, because they're an animal that's supposed to be outside. But you can keep a dog, you can have a hunting dog, there's nothing wrong with keeping a dog as a pet, as long as it stays outside of where you pray, and everything is fine. A lot of people, especially South Asian people, did not really know that unless they were well traveled or well learned. And I've had even discussions about it, and I was like, well, listen, we were raised with a different school of thought. We never even knew that you could even have a dog like that. Not only that, then you read the Quran, and the Quran talks about hunting dogs and having a hunting dog, and that the food that it catches for you is halal, is permissible. And it just shocks you, because when it says that, you start to think, well, wait a minute, when I was a kid, they used to tell me that dogs were this, and yet the Quran is saying this. There's obviously something going on here. A lot of kids don't read the Quran, and if they do, they read it under a teacher who doesn't really point out these differences in hadith and Quran, because it makes it look as if that someone made a mistake somewhere in Islamic history, and they don't want to do that.
Oh, I see. So there is a fear that if you point out that there are these differences of opinion within the tradition amongst the different schools of thought, there might be there's a fear perhaps that certain individuals in the religion may think that this is more of a problem than just a differences of opinion.
Yeah, it's just a fear. It's really fear. Um, it's an unwarranted fear because the ones that are are restraining this information, or rejecting the criticism, are the same ones that say that Islam is the truth. Well, if it's the truth, which I do believe it's the truth, then you don't have to worry about people questioning it. They'll investigate for themselves and they'll see what it is. But this fear, this unwarranted fear, it causes problems, not just for Muslims, but for anybody on a macro level. On the entire world scale, fear itself is a problem. It hinders knowledge, it hinders growth, it hinders a lot, and it's a problem.
It makes me wonder, that if it almost seems to me that this sort of this nuance or these differences of opinion is something that should be, at least in my mind, should be embraced, considering that one of the harshest polemic notions, at least that I'm familiar with, is really the overgeneralizing of the religion of Islam and sort of this painting all Muslims with this broad brushstroke. And I would think that if people were more aware, if they were told by Muslims, and if Muslims themselves sort of embrace this diversity of opinion and the nuance of their tradition, that it would even allow non-Muslims to see that Islam is not this monolith, but that it actually has this
Yeah.
rich of differences. And so uh, I wonder, if you think that if your opinion is that if more Muslims, accepted this diversity, do you think it would do a better job for public relations for the religion of Islam in the 21st century?
It would be fantastic, because when it was happening in the golden age, that was the best age for Islam. Even Muslims know that. In Andalus, and where the Jews and Muslims lived together, prospered together, shared ideas. Going into your point about that you wanted to speak about Sufism, the influence of Sufism on Jewish on Jewish traditions is well known. I think Rambam, the great Jewish scholar, his son was into Sufism. He was practically almost like a Sufi. There was no difference, except for the fact that he was Jewish. But his understanding of the mystical interpretation and the approach of the mystical interpretation by Muslims was very familiar and very palatable to the Jewish way of thinking at that time. And we mixed ideas, and thus that was the best time. I mean, it's the golden age of Islam. And why is it so interesting to know that during the golden age of Islam is when it was the most diverse, when there were the most diverse opinions, when there was acceptance, when there was you know discussions and talks and things of that nature. I mean, that's what shows that that's how important it is for Islam and for everyone.
Right, and actually, some of my favorite Muslim writers or scholars that come from that period in that particular location in Al Andalus. I mean, I'm thinking of scholars like Ibn Rushd, the philosopher, Ibn
Mhm.
Arabi, the great Sufi teacher, and Ibn Hazm, the
Yep.
Zahiri scholar of fiqh. I definitely see that this is something that's very important for the history of the tradition, and I had no idea that Rambam's son was so influenced by Sufism. So it's interesting to see this members of different traditions coming together and having this open dialogue and sharing or embracing each other's tradition in such a way. And so I'm wondering, in your own experiences, have you seen this type of cross pollination occurring, perhaps where you reside, or is this something that you hope for, or have you seen examples of this in the 21st century?
Well, what I've seen is people that know something is up. Their ideas are really scattered. They aren't really refined, but they're happy to know that it's not as rigid as they thought it was. And it's kind of like, releasing a kid into a playground, and he sees all these new toys and new swing sets, and he doesn't necessarily know how to use them, but he just grabs them all and he starts to make sense out of it. And like I said, with what's happening with Christians today, what's happening slowly with Muslims today, is it's a transitional period. And I think what I found in myself is what I think everyone's going to find in years time, which is basically that it's supposed to be this way. When it comes to different people and different traditions, it was supposed to be like this. The Quran, there's a stanza in the Quran which is, to me, one of the, if not most awesome parts of the Quran that I've that I can have ever read. And it's in Surah Al-Ma'idah, which is the fifth surah, the fifth chapter of the Quran, verses 40 to 48. And it speaks about the revelation process. And it talks about how the Torah, God gave the Torah to the Jewish people, and that they were obligated to keep it. And if they don't follow it, then they'll be among the wrongdoers. Then it says, afterwards, we sent Jesus, peace be upon him, and we gave him something as well to give to the people, confirming the Torah that came before him. And then whoever wants to whoever's Christian should follow the gospel of Jesus. It literally says that. And if they don't, then they're wrongdoers. And then afterwards, we sent Muhammad, peace be upon him, with the Quran, verifying everything that came before it and confirming everything that came before it. And then it says, to each of you, we gave your own Sharia, literally, the word Sharia, law. What they all talk about as having Sharia law. You see all these people saying there should be Sharia law, the whole world should be under one Sharia law. They don't know jack, because if they knew, why is God saying, to each of you we gave a Sharia and a clear way, a minhaj, which means like a custom, a way of life, a way to operate, because every culture is different naturally, based on their environment, based on their language, based on their experience. To each of you we gave a Sharia and a custom. If we wanted to, we could have made you a single people, united. But our mission is to test you in what we have given you. So race, as in a race for virtue, not a race to fight each other, a race for virtue. In other words, if I see a Jewish person and he's following the Torah and he's doing everything he's supposed to and he's being on point, and I'm slacking as a Muslim, he inspires me to catch up in my race, and I'm supposed to be a better Muslim. Or vice versa. He's Jewish and he sees me praying 5 times a day. He sees me fasting. He sees me doing everything that a Muslim is supposed to do, greeting people with a smile, helping people, charity. And he says to himself, you know what? I got to get back on my Torah game, and I got to start being a better Jew. Race as in a race for virtue. And in the end, God will explain all of which made you different. That, to me, is one of the greatest stanzas I've ever read in my life, and probably will be, and made so much sense to me as a Muslim who at one point thought, just like many people think, if Islam is right, then Judaism must be wrong. Or if Judaism is right, then Islam must be wrong. If Christianity is right, then both of them are supposed to be wrong. And so I always thought about things in a one world kind of way. I thought there was just one way of doing it. But when you study the history, you study the context, you study the original teachings, you get into the nitty gritty of what the original founders spoke about and how they spoke and what they said, and you get into all the information, you'll start to see that it's really just everyone teaching the same base wisdom, but in a different way for a different culture and for a different time. And no one's really wrong in that sense. It's wrong to fight with each other and say that I'm better than you. It's kind of like saying,
with
to a hummingbird saying to a cardinal, like, you're wrong unless you become a hummingbird. Everything about nature, for anyone who believes in God, everything about what you see that God made is about diversity and creativity and differences and everything complementing each other. Why would it be any different for religion?
I certainly would agree with that point for sure. So and I thank you for going into detail about that. And I think that many people, I would hope, would strive for this type of unity in plurality, as I would say.
Yes.
And so, I'm wondering then, when you have one thing that I've noticed, some Muslims have pointed out to me that there seems to be this sort of dichotomy between, at least in the media, and I want to get your thoughts on this, between the sort of the ultra conservative percentage of Muslims around the world, which are usually characterized as being Salafi or Wahhabi, whatever those terms might mean,
Yes.
uh, and the sort of Puritan movement versus all the other Muslims. And so I'm wondering, what are your thoughts about this sort of dichotomy? Do you think this dichotomy really exists, or do you think that it's more nuanced than that? Or what are your thoughts about this sort of potentially ultra conservative movement, if it exists?
It definitely exists. It was born. Well, Salafi and Wahhabi is they're almost interchangeable. They're striving for the same thing. Um, Wahhabism started with Abdul Wahhab, um, not too long ago, a few hundred years ago, and the reason for this Puritan movement, it started because of extreme liberalism. You'll notice that in history, one extreme gives birth to another. If you go too much to the left, someone who's too much to the right is going to become more appealing or be able to have a real big appeal because no one's necessarily in the middle. So the drive to have a Puritan movement came from the liberalism and extremism in the liberal sense of the Ottoman Empire, from I would say around the 15th century on, till their fall. Um, that extreme liberal view of Islam, extremely liberal, gave rise to a person like Abdul Wahhab, who was so upset that he wanted to find the pure Islam. He wanted to go back to the purity of Islam. But because his intention was born out of uh, the extreme liberalism that he saw, he went extremely to the right. So that's the reason why the people who are Wahhabi, they don't understand that the founder of their movement, of that school, of that way of thinking, was himself an extremist in the sense that he was born out of an extreme liberal environment, and that's the reason why he did that. That carried on, and then the Saudi family, Ibn Saud, he was the one who adopted Wahhabism, and then when the British came and liberated the Arabs from the Ottoman Empire, they established the an agreement with that family who happened to be Wahhabi, and then gave them the authority over that land. And then after the oil and the influence that they got from that, they began to spread their teachings, throughout the Gulf states and in and around the area. So that's where it really started from. It's a few hundred years old, and it's a real situation with real beginnings and a real reason as to why it's so extreme. This is the reason why they think the way they do.
And I'm wondering how influential do you think this particular group is? I mean, I feel like many polemicists against the religion of Islam will invoke movement to sort of separate what they perceive as being Muslims who have accepted modernity versus the sort of puritanical, uh, ultra conservative Muslims floating around. I assume it's a myth. I'd like to believe that it's a myth. Where I think it was a few years after September 11th, 2001, where it was stated something like 80% of American mosques are influenced by the Salafi ideology. I mean, do you think that that's essentially a polemicist myth, or that has really no reality, or what are your thoughts on that?
I don't know. I haven't been around enough mosques in enough areas for me to know. I know for sure in New York, that's definitely not the case. But I can't speak for other countries because I haven't seen how it is in a lot of other countries. I have seen I have seen mosques in other states in the United States that, I mean, I went one time to a mosque. I won't say the name of the mosque, but they for their Friday prayer, the whole sermon was about just denouncing the state of Israel. So there wasn't really any wisdom in the teaching. It's not supposed to be anything about politics. It's supposed to be about fixing the spiritual situation within the Muslim community. But the entire lecture was about the state of Israel, and chances are, when it's political, to achieve the agenda, whatever it may be, the Salafist or Wahhabist ideology is more palatable for their cause. So I think that when you say 80%, I would say it would, maybe it is a majority. I wouldn't say, I don't know if I can say 80%, but even that majority is a passive acceptance. It's more of like they'll say it, but no one's really gonna do it. So, for instance, you might ask a Muslim who, is told all their life about a certain way of understanding Sharia law, very strict ideology, and they don't really know any better. So they themselves don't really care to do it. But if you ask them in a poll, they're not gonna lie because they don't know anything else. So they'll be like, yeah, I guess you're supposed to cut their head off or something like that. They'll just agree because they don't know enough to not agree. So that doesn't necessarily mean that a majority of Muslims are thinking like they want to do that. It's just that they have no other information to say anything else. I mean, it's like saying, if do people who don't believe Jesus died for your sins, are they going to hell? You ask a majority of Christians that. If 80% says yes, that doesn't mean that they're out there wanting people to go to hell because they don't believe in Jesus. You know what I mean? It's just more of like, well, I don't really know any other interpretation because that's all I've been taught. So I'm going to have to say yes. So what it looks like on paper and what it is in reality is not exactly the same thing. I hope that you understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I think it goes back to what we were saying earlier about the importance of understanding the nuances in a tradition, which is something that I think is important for a member of any religion to understand not only the history of one's own tradition, but also the diversity of opinion, and also that takes a lot of religious literacy. And unfortunately, in the United States, it seems to me that a lot of people were religious literacy, so other people's religion. And if that's the have this sort of passivity or what appears on you said versus maybe know or what they might actually believe. So yeah, I think your answer was well said, and that makes sense to me. Um, to kind of get off the topic, I'm wondering how what's your perception of American and their view of and on this topic, or how much influence does Sufism have on American Muslims today? Would you say?
It has a lot of influence. It has even more influence now than before because of all the extremism they see and they hear about, mostly from the media and what's happening in the Middle East. Extremism is more of a reality because of the displaced communities and peoples throughout the Middle East after the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. It became a lot worse because now you have destabilization, which creates more opportunity for. I mean, that's what gave rise to ISIS. This whole destabilization of the entire region, um, or at least, I'm sorry, allowed ISIS, a group like ISIS, to have the opportunities they had to take over so much land. I should say that rather. Um, but Sufism, or the mystical interpretation of Islam, is a lot more attractive now because it's completely nonviolent. It doesn't even investigate. It doesn't even talk about anything as far as violence. It's completely personal, and you'll notice that in more developed countries, there's a trend to be attracted more to the spiritual or mystical interpretation of any religion or faith, um, because of the fact that life becomes more personal. There's really not that much violence going on. So if you're not living in a violent climate, and you're living a decent life, and you're living a full, complete, nice life, and there's not that much problems, then naturally you're going to be attracted to the more mystical interpretation, the more personal interpretation of your faith, than the more physical interpretation of your faith. So I think because of in first world countries, in America particularly, these Sufi ideas, mysticism and personal interpretation of Islam, more spiritual interpretation is more attractive, and it's just natural. I think it's not something that's like, well, why is this happening? It's pretty basic, and it happens with every faith when you have more of a peaceful environment. Are you there?
That's an interesting. I hadn't really thought of it that way. Been for personal bent on one, whereas if you lived in a more violent setting, you would focus more on the physical. I hadn't really thought about that before. I think that's an interesting point. Um, so then, is this one reason why would you agree that perhaps some of the Sufis that are in the Middle East or elsewhere perhaps are facing more persecution as a result of their views, as opposed to having more of a wide acceptance perhaps in Europe and the United States?
Yeah. I mean, it's not compatible. A person who's all for, a physical change, like let's go do it. We've been attacked, and we need to fight, and they start, sorry, they start pulling out all these verses from the Quran talking about fighting, which are completely taken out of context, which are verses talking about specific events, but they're there because that's what it was talking about. Um, and they're driven with this idea to fight and be physical, whatever. They look at those who don't want to fight as being part of the problem, and they feel more of a grievance and more of an anger towards them than the actual enemy, because they feel like it's an embarrassment. They feel like it's a personal stab. You know what I mean? That's why there's more violence between Sunni and Shia than there is between Muslim and non-Muslim. Um, the Sunni mindset towards the Shia is, you're like an embarrassment. You took our faith and you added some things and you did this. This is the, so they look at it, and they're more upset about it. The same thing with the Ahmadis, which is another group who have a certain teacher that they believe in, and they believe certain things about him, and because of that and their views and what they say, they're persecuted as well. So naturally, you're going to feel upset about someone who says that, no, what you're saying is not exactly right. It's really this, and it's almost like it's taking away from your identity. So you feel more anger towards them than an actual enemy who says, I just don't like you for who you are. At least they're not taking away your identity. So that's the anger that develops in the Muslim community between Sunni, Shia, Sufi, Ahmadi, or whatever sect you want to talk about.
Imagine that certainly if you feel like your identity is being threatened, I could see where that would produce anger and outrage in particular. Speaking of the, since you mentioned the Shia, do you see more of, at least in the United States, do you see more of a unity between Sunnis and Shia than perhaps elsewhere, or is there sort of like this sectarian? I mean, obviously, I would, at least I've, based on my understanding, the sectarianism isn't as bad here in the United States as opposed to elsewhere. But do you see more of a unity between the United States than abroad, or what
Yes,
of that
and
at all?
yes, and for two reasons. One, because this country is stable. Regardless of all the things that go on, this country is extremely stable compared to many other countries in the world. And because of that, and because of the law, and because of the police, and because of so many different things, we are put in a position where we're forced to have a civilized discussion. Now, you should always have a civilized discussion, but the people who wouldn't have it are put into check by having the law, and having a secure state, so that no one's going to really get into more than just an argument because they don't want to go to jail. So that's one thing. The second thing is a natural thing as well, because now when two people are in a peaceful state, there's less between them to create a situation where they would get violent. So there's more of an opportunity to exchange ideas comfortably, because you're not aggravated as much about your living conditions and the situation that you're in. So there's two reasons: one, because of the security and the stability of the state, and two, because that also fosters an environment which is more conducive to exchanging ideas, regardless of how much difference there is between a sect.
Right, that makes sense. The more, if you have law enforced, if you have a stable society, you can have an environment where you're sharing ideas. That does make sense, for sure. So for those of you who might be just tuning in now, My guest today is Mr. Gibran Malik, and we are talking about our initial topic was Sufism and the commonalities, the common root between Judaism and Islam. We've subsequently a number of different topics about estates and also how it might be viewed or practiced. If you would like questions, Todd, please feel free to either send me a message in a number of different ways, either from Twitter, my Facebook page, YouTube. Leave a comment, and if you'd like to come on to the show and speak to my guest, please go ahead and also contact me in these variety of ways, and I will give you the link to the Hangout so you can ask a question of Mr. Malik while the time is still happening. So I don't see any comments or questions thus far. So I guess a question that I'd like to ask you now. So with regards to your movement, this promoting this common ground, more about your in particular. It says here that you're the founder of the movement called the Common Accord. Can you give me some?
Say that again. You broke up again right at the end.
Because I was just going to ask if you could give me some details about your movement, the Common
Accord.
Accord.
Yes. So what I've done is in the past year, I decided to start this movement. I had this idea from before then, but I didn't want to start anything because if I didn't have something that was really real and tangible that it made sense to do, which would create a situation which is more than just a photo op of like interfaith dialogue. I mean, a lot of these interfaith places and situations when they have events, it's just more of a photo op. It's really just to say, yeah, it's so much fun. We have similarities, and we don't really all want to kill each other or whatever. But it doesn't really do much more than say that we're not all trying to kill each other. But why? The problem is not addressing that. You have to take it a step further. And I wanted to know if it's possible to not have to feel like the other person is incomplete. And I think that's the grounds for all the negative emotions and the negative reality that precipitates religious fighting and infighting and separatism and all this stuff that comes along with it. I think the real thing here is it starts in the mind of a person that says, you're not like me, so you're not perfect. And you won't be perfect until you're like me or think like me. And in the beginning, it's like, okay, well, you don't, so that's fine, but I want you to think like me. But when you don't get that response, after a while, it says to yourself in your mind, you start to think, well, then you must be against me. And then all these negative emotions start to swirl around in the mind. It happens subconsciously. It doesn't happen consciously. And then it just ends up being this animosity towards each other, which is reciprocated by either side. It doesn't matter. It's not one person who started it in particular. It's just a natural state which creates the atmosphere for it. And whoever responds first. And what I wanted to address was the cause. I like to always look at the cause of a situation. We know what's happening. We know the problems in the world. What are the causes? How do we stop it? How do we fix the cause? Is it fixable? Is it something that just can't be fixed? Can we investigate? Can we find out? So when I found out that it could be fixed, I began to, think about starting this movement. But I knew that all the ideas that I had, all the research that I had discovered, and all the conclusions that I've come to would really shake people up. And when I say people, I'm talking about Jews, Muslims, and Christians all together. And, I spoke to a few close friends of mine that keep things between us, and they've assured me that what I'm doing has probably never been done before, at least not the way I'm doing it and not what I'm saying. And it's not the most typical approach, I should say. But for now, I want to first establish a connection between all three faiths, in particular Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, establish the common ground, and then from there have an intellectual discussion. I would present my ideas and show them a world where they can live without feeling animosity towards each other and without feeling like the other person is incomplete because they don't do what you do. And that's my goal with the Common Accord.
I appreciate that explanation. You did cut out a little bit, like right at like just the last thing that you repeat that so we can hear it clearly.
Okay. Yeah, my internet connection is not the best. Okay, so basically, I want people to come together based on the reason of knowing that you don't have to feel like the other person is incomplete. I have an intellectual case, I have a presentation, I have a form, a platform for being able to be Jewish, Christian, and Muslim and not have to feel like the other person is incomplete and not have to feel like you have to sacrifice who you are in order to please the other person. There is a way. I've found some stuff, but I can't just drop it all at once. And my initial, desire is to have all of us come together for an intellectual greeting, meeting, and discussion openly, and accept each other and understand first the premise right now, which is clear, is that we really have a lot more in common than what we have different, and we should stick together.
Well, that sounds fantastic. Do you have a website for your movement by chance, or if any viewers were interested in learning more, do you have anything that I can link after the show is posted to my YouTube channel, which people can find out more information?
Yes, I have a Facebook page, The Common Accord. For now, it's facebook.com/The Common Accord, altogether one word, TheCommon ACCORD. Just go like the page, and yeah, there's going to be a lot more coming. This is a transitional period for me. I'm really accumulating a lot of information, and I'm about to actually release a book in the next 6 months or so, which will also be something that will basically supplement the Common Accord's ideology and I should say philosophy, and philosophical approach to religion in and of itself, and how we should treat each other, how we should work with each other, and how we should understand each other.
Well, that's wonderful. Certainly look forward to seeing your book once it's out, and I will link your Facebook page to this video once it's archived onto my channel, so that people can check it out and like it. So I think that's fantastic. So yeah, I mean, it sounds like a very.
That was the. You hear that?
I hear that. Yeah.
That's the call to prayer. So, which conveniently has arrived at the time when we're wrapping up the podcast. I think we're about it.
Yeah.
Almost done.
Yeah. I'm going to carry on the show for another half hour, but I think that's a convenient place. So if you have to, if you answer the call to prayer, then please do so. But I want to thank you again for coming on to the show and having this discussion with me, and I hope to have you on in the near future. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I thank you for the platform. Any questions, anything like that, from the viewers, if we collect them for the next, discussion or whatever it may be. And then I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Certainly.
All right.
Well, thank you.
All right. Peace be upon you.
Okay, and that was you were just listening to Gibran Malik, and the founder of the Common Ground movement. Very fascinating gentleman. If you missed the earlier part of the show, it will be archived on my YouTube channel. Excellent discussion regarding this pluralistic view from an Islamic perspective, from a Muslim perspective, and one that embraces unity and plurality, as a phrase that I used earlier in the show with when discussing this topic with Mr. Malik, and a difference between this perspective and perhaps one that can be termed the Salafi movement. I was thinking of the Salafi movement with regards to Michael Muhammad Knight's newest book, Why I Am a Salafi, which I purchased 2 days ago, and I was it one day ago. It was probably one day ago. And have not finished the book, but certainly have enjoyed the first chapter of it, where he talks about what does it mean to be a Salafi. Do people have a understanding of the Salafi movement, and what's it all about? And so I think from Mr. Malik's perspective, the Salafi movement is a very real thing. When I asked part of this, what Michael Muhammad Knight calls in his book a fear-mongering perspective that 80% of American mosques, American Muslim mosques, are influenced by the Salafi movement. He said that he couldn't comment on that, but that at least in the mosques that he's been to, it would appear that that's not the case for the majority, was my understanding of his response. I would agree with Michael Muhammad Knight's assessment that anything that sounds like a rigid dichotomy, where you're saying that half of the American Muslim population is this ultra-conservative movement and the other half is this passive moderate movement, just seems like a overgeneralization on both counts. One thing that I appreciate about Mr. Gibran Malik's discussion with me just now was the diversity of the tradition and the nuance of the tradition. This is something that I have seen when I have been reading two books that I mentioned earlier in the show, which I highly recommend to everyone, which is Jonathan A.C. Brown. He's an American Muslim scholar who has studied with Muslim scholars abroad and also received his PhD here in the United States. One book, the Hadith, Muhammad's I'm forgetting the subtitle now. I believe it's Muhammad's Gift to the Medieval World, and also misquoting Muhammad, his newer book, where you really get a sense that the Muslim tradition has always been very diverse. And there's been these nuances amongst the studying and the classification of hadith. I talked to Mr. Malik earlier about the hadith, as this is a very important topic for American Muslims to understand, that there's been this rich diversity of opinion about the subject. And also that Jonathan A.C. Brown discusses the German scholar Harold Motzky, who I have talked to Klingshore about, the YouTube user Klingshore, where Motzky is having a nuanced way of studying the hadiths, where he's able to date certain hadiths going back as early as the mid 700s. Now, I would say that the difference probably between Motzky and Brown is that Motzky, being a non-Muslim, is not willing to say hadiths are authentic, i.e., they're actually of the Prophet Muhammad, but he's willing to date these things to a very early strata. Not all of them, but there are a number of examples where at least there is a core of the tradition that obviously embellished over time, but there seems to be a collection of core phrases that go back to an early time, i.e., at least going back to the early Umayyad period. So I think that, as I mentioned with Mr. Malik, that it seems important to be religious, to have a religious literacy. And that it seems to me that not many people, Muslim and non-Muslim, really have this deep understanding of the nuances of hadith. Certainly when I was a Muslim myself, and I considered myself one, I learned the vast majority of what I'm talking about right now here on the show by reading texts from classical and modern scholarship. Certainly it did not come from conversations I was having with an imam in a mosque. Certainly I was told by Muslim friends of mine who were born into the tradition that I was reading things that they really had never bothered to read about their own faith. And this really surprised me. But this is not something that is just Muslims. I'm not trying to say that this is just a problem for Muslims in the modern era. As I mentioned to Mr. Malik earlier in our conversation, this is an issue for Jews and Christians. That the layman Christians and Muslims and Jews, there's this deficit of knowledge, and I think that if we're going to combat this very negative polemic that's against all religions, but particularly the religion of Islam right now, that you can paint, that it's okay to paint this broad stroke, this broad brush stroke, that all Muslims are the same, this monolithic image, then it really is the task of members of all faiths, but particularly talking about Islam in this episode, to champion this concept of the diversity of the tradition. This may be unsettling for some people, because if you start to admit to diversity, and this is something that Mr. Malik and I talked about earlier, if you admit to this diversity, then some people may think that there's something wrong, that they are losing sight of this thing that's called unity and diversity, and unity and plurality, and I think that that's an unfortunate fear. But I think reading books by Jonathan A.C. Brown and Michael Muhammad Knight really just goes to show you that, at least here in the United States, American Muslims are attempting to have what I have talked about in some blog posts of mine, a renaissance, if you will, a rediscovery of the classical tradition, and that is informing their current practice as modern 21st century Muslims in the United States and elsewhere, Europe, wherever. And I think that's a very important movement to have. I think it's a very important experience for people to have, is to have this rediscovery of the diversity of someone's tradition, not just Islam, but Christianity and Judaism and all as well. So keep that in mind. I would say when exploring these traditions, is the diversity, that none of them are this monolith. So I'm still open to taking questions. I'm looking at all my media platforms here. I've got multiple tabs open, monitoring Twitter and Facebook and Google Plus, YouTube. If anyone would like to call into the show, I can send you the link. You just have to contact me in one of three ways, really. Either my Facebook, which is Aussie CDA on Facebook, either Twitter, tweet me a message, or also you can leave a comment on the live stream that's happening right now on the YouTube channel, on my YouTube channel, Aussie CDA. So just let me know that you're trying to, if you'd like to come on to the show, and I'll send you the link to the Google Hangout, so that you can either, if you have a question or a comment regarding the topic at hand, or any other topic for that matter. So if I don't get to you right away, it's because I'm toggling between different tabs at the moment. So because I usually have a guest all the way to the end of the show, and that's nothing against Mr. Malik. I know he had to go answer the call to prayer. Something that I haven't been able to do on one of these podcasts of mine is to actually do something which is the news, or what I like to do is just kind of go through Twitter and see if there's any articles that present itself that I just would like to sort of maybe read the caption or read a little bit and sort of comment, and just sort of see if there's anything interesting. So I'm on Twitter right now, and I'm going to scroll down. I'll try and pick a topic that is an article that is relevant to the discussion, but it's Twitter, and obviously this could be anything. One thing that one Twitter account that I subscribe to that I'd like to give a shout out to is at Rumi Secrets. A very excellent Twitter account if you're interested in Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi and you'd like to follow this particular Twitter user. This person, I believe, is writing a book about Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi, the famous Muslim Sufi poet, scholar, and mystic of the 14th century or 13th century, one or the other. I think he died in the late 13th century, if I'm not mistaken. If you're interested in getting a daily quote from Rumi on your Twitter feed, I would highly recommend that particular Twitter account. I just mentioned that because I'm scrolling down and I just saw his account. I really appreciate Rumi. When I first wanted to learn about Islam back in 2006, I stumbled across a quote by Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi and read it and thought, I wonder what religion this guy follows. And the subsequent investigation led me to Islam and to study the religion, and ultimately I converted to it. Obviously, I've since left the religion, but I still have a fondness for the mystics of the tradition in general. So just scrolling down here and seeing different news feeds. Well, this is an interesting one here. So one by the Huffington Post Religion, at HuffPost Relig. About 1 hour ago, they posted this. Why is Pope Francis talking about abortion now? And what does it mean for Catholic women? So I understand that this has nothing to do with the subject at hand, but since this is sort of a shot in the dark, I'm going to click on this article and just sort of read it and maybe comment on it. Any solid relevance to the topic at hand. But when Pope Francis is in the news, I think everyone kind of pauses and likes to see what he says. At least I do. Because Pope Francis is kind of a rock star. He's the one pope that an agnostic friend of mine said, wow, this pope is making me consider Catholicism. And so if a pope can do that for an agnostic, it's probably a good thing. Oh, and now you can't hear this, but I can hear music on my end, because I'm sure
is back in the headlines in recent weeks.
Interesting. There's a video.
Attacks on Planned Parenthood.
Oh,
Pope Francis giving all priests.
I had to click it off. Unfortunately, I apologize to the viewers because I was hearing a voice that was a audio recording of another show talking about Pope Francis and abortion, and I could hear it, but obviously none of you could hear it. So we're going to move on past that. But it's an interesting question. Why is Pope Francis talking about abortion now? It was talking about Planned Parenthood. And I don't really know if I really want to go into that topic, so I think I will not. But if anybody's interested, check out that article in particular. I just couldn't concentrate because I was having another person's voice in my headphones, and that was rather distracting. Another article here from the New York Times Opinion, at NYTO or NYT Opinion on Twitter. Northern Ireland, UK, and US leaders must work to salvage Good Friday peace agreement. I'm not sure exactly what that's about, but that's an interesting subject, the Northern Ireland issues between Protestants and Catholics. Moving on down the Twitter feed here. Well, this is interesting. Not necessarily about religion in particular, but the New York Times article, acting on a tip about bones deep in a cave, scientists found a new species of a human ancestor. Well, we should probably click on that because, anything about the discovery of our species is probably a good thing to check into. Let's hope there's not some advertisement that's going to suddenly erupt into my headphones here from the New York Times website. So the article here is Homo naledi, new species in human lineage, is found in South African cave. This is dated from September 10th of this year. Shows a gentleman holding a skull. Professor Lee R. Berger Johannesburg. A deadly glimpse through a crack in a limestone wall deep in the rising star cave. Lots and lots of old bones. So this, and a video was about to start, but I was able to mute it in time. So for those of you who are listening to this, there is a video accompanying this article, which shows the unveiling of some of the bones. So the article continues. The remains covered the earthen floor beyond the narrow opening. This was, the scientists conclude, a large dark chamber for the dead of a previously unidentified species of the early human lineage, Homo naledi. The new hominin species was announced on Thursday by an international team of more than 60 scientists led by Lee R. Berger, an American paleoanthropologist who's professor of human evolution, studies at the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg. The species name H. naledi refers to the cave where the bones lay undisturbed for so long. Naledi means star in the local Zulu language. Very fascinating. So this is something that I think is always interesting when this sort of topic is brought into the news. I often wonder what this does for people who deny evolution, particularly creationists who take a literal stance to spirituality and their scripture. I coincidentally just checked out Richard Dawkins' book, The Greatest Show on Earth, as a just for a second read, and I'm often curious to see why people deny evolution and use their religion to do this. I'm just wondering why, when people read an article like this, do they just think, oh, it's a hoax, another evidence of a hoax, or do they actually consider it to be something worth exploring? So those are my thoughts based on that. So looking again, I've got, about 10 minutes, 12 minutes, give or take, left in the podcast. Again, if anyone would like to call in or ask a question, I'm checking here, and so far I'm not seeing anyone attempting to get a hold of me based on Twitter, Facebook, or my YouTube channel. So I will continue on with with just going down my news feed here. So yes, interesting new evidence. There's another species of early and that we're talking, of that article. What does that mean for people who might ultimately deny these things based on religion? So moving on down here, seeing a number of things on the news feed. Nothing that's really something that jumps out at me. So again, Huffington Post articles about September 11th, 2001. Amazing that how much time has passed. I was in 7th grade when September 11th happened. Coincidentally, I was learning about Islam in my 7th grade history class when 9/11 happened. Very interesting timing. And I recall my teacher did a really good job of explaining Islam to us and why we shouldn't overgeneralize all Muslims because of the actions of the Al-Qaeda terrorists. But it's mind-blowing to me. I was 12 years old at the time, and now I'm 26. How much time has passed? Prayers go out to all of the individuals who lost loved ones on 9/11, and also individuals who continue to suffer health complications because of their exposure to the Ground Zero attacks. Moving on down the Twitter page here, just trying to see if there's anything else religion-oriented that I can see. So far, not really seeing anything. One thing I would like to say, though, since we're getting close to the wrapping up of this particular episode, next episode is scheduled to be Saturday the 19th at 4:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. I'm going to have Cling Shore on again. We are going to do the third and final installment of our hadith discussion, focusing on Harold Motzki, the German scholar, and his Isnad Matan analysis. I've been on a Motzki kick for the past week and a half, reading Motzki's works. Haven't read everything, but certainly have read a number of his works, and also Jonathan A.C. Brown. Very fascinating topic. So Klingshore and I are going to attempt to tackle that topic next time and see if we can put that sucker to rest, so we can move on to other topics. It's been a great. If you haven't had a chance to watch the 2 previous episodes with Klingshore, when he was on my show, I highly recommend that you do so, so you can kind of be caught up to speed on this topic in particular. Passing Rumi's secrets on Twitter. A quote from Rumi's Masnavi: "A mystic dreams while he is wide awake." Love it. and I'm going to for sure retweet and favorite that. I always do that. If you follow me on Twitter, you'll notice that most of my retweets are from this individual, from the Asheville Jungian Society, because they'll usually quote Carl Jung, and also the Swedenborg Foundation with excellent quotes from Swedenborg. So I really recommend that you follow these individuals and see, if you enjoy seeing some excellent quotes consistently on your newsfeed. So still scanning to see if there's anything else that might jump out at me here from Twitter. Another thing that I think is fascinating is thinking about the comment that Mr. Malik made while he was on the show regarding, a more peaceful environment births a more mystical approach to a religion. I think I had never really considered that before. But in thinking about it, pastor at my church, because since we're Swedenborgians, Swedenborgianism is a very mystical, spiritual subgroup within the broader Abrahamic tradition. And I think that it's a minister in our denomination actually mentioned something that was very similar to something that Gibran Malik mentioned earlier on the show, when he said, our minister said something like, it's a very sophisticated theology, and not everyone really has time to learn the nuance and the sophistication of mysticism and esoteric tradition. So I think that it's that's very similar to something that Gibran Malik said earlier, where if you're in a country where you're living in relative peace, you're not stressing about, violence or bombs going off, you probably have more of an interest and more time to not focus on the physical aspects of one's faith, the exoteric as opposed to the esoteric. I think is an interesting perspective. Oh, here's a good one. So looking at the Huffington Post religion again, the headline is some Mormons are prepping for doomsday, like right now. Oh, we have to click on this. I've got 8 minutes left in the show. Let's see if I can summarize this one for us before the episode is over. Why some Mormons are prepping for doomsday. It could be just around the corner, it says. Salt Lake City. Mixing a brew of biblical prophecies, the Hebrew calendar, a volatile economy, world politics, and astronomical occurrences, hordes of Utahns have become convinced that calamitous events are imminent, maybe by month's end, and are taking every precaution. They are called preppers and are buying up food storage kits, flashlights, blankets, and tents. Some are even bracing to leave their homes if need be. At American Forks Thrive Life, which sells mostly freeze-dried food, sales have shot up by 500% or more in the past couple of months, says customer service representative Ricardo Aranda. There is a sense of urgency, like something is up. A lot of people are mentioning things about September, like a financial collapse. And I'll stop there for a moment. Wow. I don't really recall hearing Mormons talking about the end times. Usually this is like some fringe evangelical group who's talking about this. This is one reason why I'm actually really glad that I'm a Swedenborgian, because Swedenborg said the second coming already happened, and it's still happening, but in a spiritual sense, that the book of Revelations is not to be taken literally. There's not going to be an end time scenario. So I'm really glad that I can be thankful that this is not actually literally happening. But unfortunately for these Mormons in Utah, they apparently are convinced of this. But let's continue on. I'm really curious here. So talking more about, they're buying these 74-hour emergency kits and all these things. A lot of customers, he says, believe that this is the month that will happen, with a blood moon and a currency collapse and everything. So in other words, it's the whole kitchen sink of doomsday. Here's how the doomsday scenario plays out, continues the article. History, some preppers believed, is divided into 7-year periods, like the Hebrew notion of Shemitah on Sabbath. In 2008, 7 years after 9/11, the stock market crashed, a harbinger of a devastating recession. It's been 7 years since then, and Wall Street has been fluctuating wildly in recent years in the wake of China devaluing its currency. Thus, they believe starting September 13th, which is tomorrow, at least for now, The beginning of the Jewish high holy days, there will be another even larger financial crisis based on the United States wicked launch the days of tribulation as described in the Bible. Holy crap! Did you hear that, everyone? You heard it live on my show tomorrow. That's amazing. So I'm gonna be at church when this is supposedly gonna be going down. Amazing. With the article, September 28th, we'll see a full moon and a major earthquake in or near Utah. Of course. Sorry. Some anticipate in troops disruptions and decline, chaos and hysteria. So these speculations stem from Julie Rowe's book, My Journey Beyond the Veil, and The Time Is Now. Rowe, a Mormon mother of three, published the books in 2014 to detail a near-death experience in 2004 when the author says she visited the afterlife and was shown visions of the past and the future. Now, to pause for a moment, how does mock near-death experience to have visions? Nor as someone who studies psychotherapy and psychology, I can't. But I think this is a personal being, a subjective experience that's based in an objective context. But I think it's very unfortunate. So continuing with the article, though Rowe rarely gives specific dates for predicted events, she did describe in a Fox News radio interview cities of light, including scores of white tents where people will live in the mountains and sometimes be fed heavenly manna. She saw a bomb from Libya landing in Israel, but Iran will take credit. And Gadantone robbers of Book of Mormon infamy, meaning secret and corrupt leaders, are already here. Her purpose in speaking out, Rowe told interviewer Kate Daly, was to wake more of us up. We need each other as we unify in righteousness and continue to build a righteous army. When we need to defend the U.S. Constitution, we will be ready. Well, wait a minute. If there's doomsday, what is the U.S. Constitution going to have to do with anything? Right? I mean, I'm sorry. It's the end of the world, but my God, we will defend the U.S. Constitution. Bring me those hot dogs and my Budweiser, and this is America, right? Post-apocalyptic America. Continuing with the article, for the past year, the popular writer has been sharing her experiences and visions at Mormon venues nationwide, drawing crowds of eager and worried listeners. Her two books have sold more than 20,000 copies apiece. In a rare move, officials with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints sent a memo to administrators and teachers in the church educational system saying that although Sister Rowe is an active member of the LDS Church, her book is not endorsed by the church and should not be recommended to students or used as a resource in teaching them. The experiences do not necessarily reflect church doctrine. They may distort doctrine. So the LDS Church is saying, oh, well, okay, she's one of ours, but I wouldn't recommend her books for people to actually read. The late Mormon apostle Boyd K. Packer said at the 2011 LDS General Conference that the end was not near and urged young Latter-day Saints to plan to live long, productive lives. You can look forward to doing it right, Packer said. Getting married, having a family, seeing your children and grandchildren, maybe even great-grandchildren. And that's the end of the article. Fascinating. So the late Mormon apostle from the 2011 LDS General Conference essentially stated, the end is not nigh, everyone. It's all good. You can expect to keep on keeping on. Well, that's fascinating. So with a minute left in the show, I think that pretty much does it for the show. I want to thank you all for watching. And I want to thank again Mr. Gibran Malik for coming on as my guest to discuss Islam. Very, very fascinating subject that we talked about, and I appreciate him spending time here and taking time to do that. So like I said, next episode will be Cling Shore to discuss hadiths, the third and final installment of the topic, at least as we can see in the near future. Hopefully we'll all be around tomorrow. Hopefully tomorrow will not be the beginning of the apocalypse. But please, everyone, take care of yourselves. And thank you again for listening and watching. And take care. If I didn't get to your questions, please feel free to leave comments and I will address them in the next episode if time permits. Thank you all for watching, and peace be with you all.